Welcome to Crash Concepts, where the economy, energy, and the environment are explored. Up next, fresh ideas and insights into the factors that are driving the world and shaping your future. Presenting information you can't afford to live without, here's Chris Martenson.
Welcome, everyone, to this Peak Prosperity Podcast. It's November 1st, 2018, and I am your host, Chris Martenson. As we near the end of the most recent, but listen, almost certainly not the last, central bank printing spree, the big question on everybody's mind is, what's next? And after that, the next question is, well, what do I do? And you know my position on this. It's time to prepare. This is really not going to end well. But I think it's time that we turn to history and see what history has for us as a guide. And as you know, I'm a huge critic of the central banks and have even been asking publicly lately what the criminal or civil penalties maybe ought to be for central bankers that ruin the prosperity for one or more generations. I think there ought to be a penalty there. The answers from you all have been both humorous and sometimes scathing, so we're in agreement. It's really just an astonishing piece of a moment of history that we are in. Listen, while the money printing by the central banks is without historical precedent in either scope or scale, they're hardly unique. History's replete with attempts to print up prosperity, get out of fiscal jams, pull the future into the present because, well, now is always more important than later to politicians. So, what can history tell us? Here to discuss that with us is none other than my friend Mike Maloney, host of the smash hit video series Hidden Secrets of Money, former Rich Dad, Poor Dad advisor, author of the best-selling precious metals book Guide to Investing in Gold and Silver, and, of course, founder of goldsilver.com. For more than a decade, Mike's traveled the world sharing his economic insights with audiences from Hong Kong to Rome, and boy, we're going to talk about Rome today, from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. And in case you haven't heard, somehow it passed over your screen and you missed it, the two most recent episodes of this fantastic video series, Hidden Secrets of Money, they're out. And these would be episodes 9 and 10. So let's get right to it. Mike, so great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I always enjoy talking with you.
Well, first, congratulations on the release of episodes 9 and 10. And I have to tell you, episodes 1 through 8 are fantastic, but 9 and 10, the artistry is extraordinary. They're absolutely beautifully shot, edited, produced. So huge kudos to you and your team. They're really a national treasure at this point, these video series. So congratulations.
Yeah, Dan Rubach, Aidan Magnus, and Lincoln Jude. Dan is the producer, director, cameraman, editor. He scores the things, and he also writes a whole lot of the storyline and script. Well, I went around the world just saying historical facts into the camera. You know, Dan would film me, and then we have to piece all these things together. And Dan actually does help me with some of the writing. So I've got a very talented team. Aidan Magnus is the 3D animator, and Lincoln Jude is the 2D, where the hand-sketched drawings animator. They've been working together for several years now, and they've really become a cohesive unit that produces extraordinary stuff. I'm so lucky to have a team like that because, you know, to get the maximum amount of prosperity for anybody, the goal is to serve the most people that you can. Mm-hmm. If you can serve and make people's lives better, whether you're selling a product or making a service, the more people that you can serve, the better that you're going to do.
Well, you know, I wish you should tell that to some corporations because I think they've lost the thread on that particular model, where many products today feel abusive to me, not helpful. It's interesting. So,
yeah.
Hey, but you've got a great team. It really shows in these two particular episodes, and I want to start now. Just for the people who maybe aren't familiar, the few that exist now, how did you come to make this series, The Hidden Secrets of Money? Like, how long has it taken? Where did you start? You know, just how did this get going?
Well, when I started goldsilver.com, And actually, back in 2000 and 2001, after the NASDAQ crashed, and I started studying all of the global economy and markets and monetary history, I wanted to share it with as many people as possible. And, then in 2005, I incorporated goldsilver.com, and I wrote my book, Guide to Investing in Gold and Silver. When I was writing my book, that was research from the year 2001 through 2007. And so 6.5 years of research and 2.5 years of writing and editing. And I learned an awful lot. Robert Kiyosaki, he was the guru of real estate, and he wrote the largest selling financial book in history, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Well, he's the one that told me to write the book, but he wrote a book called Teach to Learn. If you really want to learn something, try and teach it, because you had better be right. And so, we went around the world. Hidden Secrets of Money is shot in 18 countries.
Wow.
There's a lot of footage that nobody's ever seen yet, and it takes a while to piece these things together, and they're extremely expensive. Each one of these, you're talking, for the two that we just aired, it's probably $250,000 to produce them.
I believe it. It's hard work.
And a few years worth of production. And because you're doing it with a small team, but it is so gratifying. It makes me feel like I've done something for the planet.
You have. You absolutely have. And so, I remember you and I were talking about this years ago, and this whole idea of teach to learn. Yeah, listen, I don't know anything until I try and form the words to come out of my mouth to communicate it to somebody, and then I'll find out if I do or if I don't, and where the gaps are. But, where you and I and Kiyosaki, a number of other people share a passion, is this idea that people need to know where they are in history. And I think it's particularly relevant now because my assessment is that both the educational system and the adult media entertainment, complex, which includes the New York Times, they do a really bad job of providing the context I think people need to get a grounding in where we are and where we're going.
Yeah, they give you these little snippets of what's current. But there is no context. There's no, how does this relate to things that have happened before? How does it relate to my life? And, anything that a politician, a government, or a central bank tries, something similar has been tried in the past. And all you got to do is go back and look at several examples of what they're trying in the past. And whatever the outcomes were before, it's probably going to be similar this time. So you've got a roadmap to the future if you look at it through the lens of history.
And I can't wait to get to these new episodes. But first, I want to know, has anybody sort of approached you, maybe a professor or a Federal Reserve historian or a monetarist, somebody come forward and said, Mike, here's something you really got substantially wrong. Let's talk about this in any of the earlier episodes. Has anybody, this question is coming because I read this blurb about G. Edward Griffin and on Wikipedia, and it used the word conspiracy to describe him as the author of Creature from Jekyll Island no less than 8 times in the intro. But there was nothing in there that said, and here's all the things he got wrong, right? And so I asked him, I said, right. Hey, Ed, tell me who's approached you. What single thing have they pointed to in the book and said, dates wrong, facts wrong, names wrong, something's wrong in here? And he said, nobody. In 25 years in print, not one single substantive criticism has come forward. So I'm wondering, have you received any substantive criticisms so far?
There's 2 episodes of 2 of the videos that are on my channel where I have received criticism. The largest one is about Russia versus the USA, and I'm showing why Russia feels they've always had sort of a mentality that they're surrounded and that the West is like about to attack or something like that. And there's a serious reason for this. If you take a look at Wikipedia has it. Go to Wikipedia, look at the map of NATO. They've got an animated map, and the NATO countries keep on creeping closer. There's more and more countries that join it over time, and it creeps closer and closer and closer to Moscow. And and military bases and such. So they have a reason for this. But in that presentation, it took several months of research to put it together and going over and over and over it. And one frame got dropped somehow. It got deleted out of my presentation. And the presentation, when I'm live on stage and I've got an audience in front of me, I'm using the presentation as sort of a bookmark to keep me, I put up images and I put up charts. I don't put any words on my presentations usually. It's rare.
Yep.
And that keeps me on track. It reminds me of what to say. And one of the frames got dropped, and it was the fall of the USSR. And so I got a date wrong in there, and I just got crucified for it. But it was an honest mistake.
Yeah.
Out of all the years that I've been doing this, because the YouTube channel started in 2009, I think.
Yeah.
And so for 9 years, I've been making videos and stuff, and there's this one accidental mistake that I just get crucified over and over again for. And then the other one is in episode 4 of Hidden Secrets of Money, how currency is created. The Bank of England came out with a statement that the way that there's 3 different ways that central banks create currency. And I listed one of them, which is the most popular one, which the Bundesbank had a display, which is in my episode 5 of Hidden Secrets of Money when we tour the Bundesbank Money Museum, that shows how fractional reserve lending works. And it confirms exactly what I said. And so what I did to make it as simple as possible was I picked a single way. But basically, a bank has to have a certain percentage of reserves. Typically, it's 10%. If they've got that, and you borrow currency to buy a house or a car, or you sign a credit card receipt, they don't have to. They just type in they credit your account with dollars, brand new dollars that they just typed. And that's where that currency comes from. But they do have to have that 10%. And I gave the Milton Friedman example, the Bundesbank example. And so on there, people are saying, you're wrong, because the Bank of England came out with a statement, but the Bank of England didn't show the 3 different ways that they create it. And the one that I showed is the way that most of the fractional reserve lending is created. If I had tried to show the way all 3 work, all it would do is just confuse everybody, the viewer. Because what I do is I try to take complex, boring economic things and make them simple to understand and exciting. Yes. So that the average person gets it and is intrigued and at least wants to learn it.
It's damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? It's too simple. That's too boring, right? It's kind of hard.
So actually, there are 2 things where I do get pushback and people saying that I'm wrong. But actually, I wasn't wrong. One was a mistake. The other one, on episode 4, I'm not wrong. That is one of the ways that they create currency. Anyway.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Once I had a professor of economics in one of my he was a UConn professor, and he stood up and he was absolutely livid, and he explained that how I was explaining how money creation worked was absolutely not how it worked, and it was very wrong for me, and I was misleading people. He was really upset, and he'd been teaching economics for 30 years. And so I just let him sort of vent, and then I pulled a comic book out and I said, I learned it all from here. It is a comic book, but it's produced by the Federal Reserve. You can order them for yourself, but here's a free copy. And 2 years later, he came back and very chagrined and said, I did not even know that any of that was true, but it is. This whole idea of money creation.
I've got a collection of them somewhere.
Aren't they great?
That the Federal Reserve produces. Yeah.
They would give them away for free. So I ordered like 400 of them once, and I've got a box of them somewhere. But the point there for me is that this is why what you're doing is so important, because money creation, it turns out, is vital. How it gets created is vital. If you create too much of it, bad things happen. And so it can be taught in a comic book. It really ought to be. But the number of people I've talked to who have been instructed how money creation works is almost zero. I think I've had 2 hands go up in all of history when I ask this question, and I ask it a lot. Who was taught how money is created in the banking system in school? And
there are a couple of college professors that have flown to events, like speaking at the Silver Summit or up at the Cambridge House events in Vancouver, Canada. I've met a few different professors that have flown there to meet me and just tell me that they use Hidden Secrets of Money to teach their students in college.
Oh, that's gratifying, isn't it?
It certainly was. It's phenomenal to know that it's being used to teach. And some of them, they just use to generate controversy in the students. Here's what the textbooks say. Here's what Hidden Secrets of Money says. And it's different. What do you think? But yeah, you really have to research this. And like everything in episode 4, it was all taken from the Federal Reserve's website. Just everything in there comes right from the Federal Reserve. So it's not like it's conspiracy theory, but I get labeled a conspiracy nut all the time.
Sure.
Because we deal in conspiracy fact, not conspiracy theory. It's researched.
I know. It's just such a lazy way for people to sort of dismiss an idea that makes them uncomfortable and they don't want to look at. But for those of us who want to know, listen, I care about this. Not, I'm sort of a sleuth. I like to know how things actually work. I can smell BS from a mile away. It's a superpower of mine. So that's why I like to know this stuff, but I think it's critical if you, again, to say this over again, if you want to know where you're going, you have to know where you are, and that means you kind of have to know where you came from. And so that's really, when we look at this, why I'm super excited to talk to you today about, you released 2 episodes kind of back to back here. And so let's start with episode 9, Fall of Empires, Rome versus the USA. Just a fantastic thing. Where do we start with this? So tell us about episode 9, and I'm really intrigued what you found in there as some of the key factors that really led to the downfall.
Well, it's history repeating over and over, and in episode 9 and 10, there's a timeline that we follow. There's Aidan Magnus came up with a 3D, a room in a building in Rome, an ancient building, and there's a table with a scroll that's laid out on it and a timeline that you can look at, and we compare things that Rome did that eventually brought about the fall of their great empire to the things that we're doing today. And most of it is deficit spending on war, public works, and social programs. Rome was Athens 500 years earlier had public works and war that they were doing deficit spending on, and that caused them to the classical period of Athens, where all those great structures were built on the Acropolis and so on, that came to an end when they did deficit spending to fight a war with Sparta. And other monetary historians have called it debasing the currency, and the public doesn't understand debasing the currency. But if you take a gold coin and you melt it down and you add 50% copper, now you can mint 2 gold coins and you can spend them. Yep. Athens had a working tax structure. They were doing that. It was part of the reason that Athens sort of faded into history and became nothing more than a satellite of Rome eventually. But Rome was doing the deficit spending for war and public works, but they also added social programs. And 20% of the population of Rome, which was about 1 million people back then, were receiving daily distributions of wheat. So that's basically welfare. It's just the same thing that we do with food stamps today. There was a whole bunch of programs and things that the different emperors came out with to keep the public placated. And we're doing the same things, and these things do bring about the fall of empires. But in episode 1, one of the things I touch on is wage and price controls, because that famous speech that people have seen before where Nixon ends the Bretton Woods system and severs the connection between gold and the U.S. dollar on August 15th of 1971, but in that same speech, he announced a 90-day freeze on wages and prices across the U.S., all wages and prices. And so it's the government trying to dictate, it's one person trying to dictate what the economy is going to do, and it doesn't work. And we come back to, we come to that part where he's announcing it, and then Aiden takes the bust of Diocletian and dissolves Nixon into this bust of Diocletian, but keeps Nixon's lips moving on Diocletian's bust.
Brilliant.
And you know that the exact same words were coming out of Diocletian's mouth 1,700 years earlier when he was introducing his Edict of Prices. And right now, we're in very low inflation, and the economy is actually trying to deflate, and the Federal Reserve fights this with inflation. But eventually, we're going to come back to, there's going to be energy released in the opposite direction after they're done with all this currency creation and zero interest rates and all that kind of stuff. There will eventually be a backlash, and they will have printed too much currency, and there will be price inflation. And at that point, you can just bet, you can count on it, that politicians are going to say, well, if we just tell everybody that prices and wages are not going to change, and we threaten them with jail time if they increase their prices or their wages, they're going to try it again. And you know that you can see it from history. It didn't work. They tried it in the French Revolution also. It was called the law of maximum. And they executed a lot of people for trying to charge a living wage or get a fair price in selling a house or a cow or the wheat that you grew. And when they do these wage and price controls, the end result is, I mean, I don't know if you remember back during this period, but I remember like Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather and showing these pictures, gruesome pictures of a tractor scooping up a bunch of chickens and dumping them into a dumpster, little baby chicks, because it was going to cost the chicken farmer more to raise those chicks than he was going to be selling them at a loss. And they started, I remember, milk being dumped into, gullies, dirt channels. I remember peach farmers just taking trucks and dumping the peaches on the dirt roads that run between the peaches in the peach orchards to sort of let them rot and have the peach pits pave the road instead of having the expense of gravel. And so wage and price controls, every time they introduce them, what happens is there's either too much of something or not enough of something, and it usually means empty store shelves. And that's what we had back in the 70s when Nixon tried this, and they had to repeal it. It didn't work. And we're going to try it again sometime in the future. I don't know how far that is away from us, but that's in episode 9. But episode 9 is it starts the thing of taxes that are too high to pay for deficit. There's deficit. They take the taxes and they would melt down the coins, expand the currency supply, and spend currency that didn't exist before. That's deficit spending on war, public works, and social programs. And they keep the public placated with the games, in the Colosseum, where they'd give away free bread and wine. So it was Bread and Circus, which is the title, basically, American Bread and Circus of episode 10. And they keep the public distracted, and we keep the public distracted with if you look at our football stadiums, it looks very much like the Colosseum. And we shot a lot of this in Rome. And then I spoke with a local business owner, a restaurant that is phenomenal. And if you ever get to Rome, please go visit Fiora di Zucca, a little family restaurant located in the middle of a residential neighborhood where the owner battles the same types of things: too many regulations, too much licensing, too much bureaucracy, and taxes that are too high, trying to stay in business. And he who serves the most wins, basically. And when the government stops people from serving one another, that reduces all of our prosperity. Whenever there's a regulation or a tax burden that causes fewer transactions to happen, the entire world suffers. If you have fewer transactions, you have less prosperity. That's it.
Well, I've heard it said that, the difference between now and then is that back then, if they were clipping coins, they were pushing currency straight into the system. But now we have this magic thing called debt. One of the great inventions of the modern banking era under the Rothschilds and beyond, figuring out how to really make debt. So if we print a lot of money and dump it into the market today, we steal purchasing power today. But when we print a lot of debt, what we're really doing is stealing from the future. How much can history tell us about that process versus just the act of creating a ton of currency?
Well, I don't feel like I am qualified to comment on it, but the historical examples, just offhand right now, I can't think of the first bonds and so on. There used to be a term, debt slave, and there was debtor's prison. So I'll have to make an episode of Hidden Secrets of Money on that, because if you really want to learn something, teach it.
Yeah. Well, tell me this. What was really what surprised you when you know?
I want to comment on that a little bit further, though, before we go on to something else, because we have created this special group of people that are exempt from moral laws of humanity. We've created a special set of laws for bankers and central banks that allow them to commit fraud and theft. And this, it is just so morally bankrupt to be creating currency, counterfeiting, because that's the way the Federal Reserve, for instance, or the ECB, the European Central Bank, or the Bank of Japan, or People's Bank of China. You want to get currency into circulation and stimulate the economy. The way you do it is you counterfeit a unit of currency and you buy something. And once you've bought that thing, the currency is now in circulation. That's the way they do it. It's that simple. And usually in the United States, we would always buy treasuries, United States treasuries, which is an IOU. So now the currency is being used to purchase an IOU, and the IOU is paid back. The Fed owns that IOU now, but the Treasury has to make payments on that IOU, and they do that by taxing us in the future. And so it is theft whenever they do this. It steals purchasing. Inflation is theft, and that inflation is caused by central banks working with the commercial banks who get to create currency. And when you buy a house, they don't understand. The commercial banker does not understand that he commits fraud and theft every hour of every day. But there's laws that we've created to allow this. It's crazy. Every time I pull out a dollar out of my wallet, I just laugh. You pull out $100 bill, and here's this piece of paper. It's got a picture of a dead guy on it and some numbers. And they've ruined the piece of paper. You can't use it to make a list because they put ink all over it. And so here's this thing that's absolutely totally worthless, and somebody else can create more of them and steal the purchasing power out of that thing that we've got. And we trust this, and we work for these things. It's insane. It's totally insane.
It is. It really is. And it's such an important point, this idea that the central banks don't print up prosperity. They create the illusion of that, and people get all excited. Oh my God, the NASDAQ's making new highs, right. And look at, these incredible prices for all sorts of stocks and bonds and all these things. But what they really do, since you can't print prosperity out of thin air, when the central bank, they print real currency, it has real purchasing power, and everybody needs to ask the question, where did that purchasing power come from? Was it created ex nihilo? No, it came from somewhere, and it was taken from somebody else. So the central banks they're just giant redistributive organizations. They're entities that basically take from party A, give to party B. They've decided party B is the Davos crowd mostly, and governments and all that, but they're taking from everybody and transferring it over here. Historically, I mean, it's really, that process is no different, right?
It's fine if you disclose it to everybody, but this is secret. It's breaking and entering. This is robbery. It's theft.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so historically speaking, I mean, that's the same process, right? That essentially that's just clipping, but it's a little bit more complex, so it's a little bit harder to get your head around. But if you understand clipping, I think you'll get the rest of this, right?
Yeah. One of the things I want to mention that you have talked about exponential growth for years.
Well, we're getting to my favorite part of episode 10.
It's one of my favorite parts too. When I see that scene of you and I, the images that Aiden came up with, the little
brilliant.
Gumby men sitting on the edge of Candlestick Park, looking up at planet Earth, and you're explaining these things, it just sent chills down my spine the first time I saw it. That and the head of Diocletian with Nixon's lips moving. These things, I just went, oh my God! When I saw this, it really drills home the facts that these things are so important, and there's something that everybody really needs to learn. Everybody.
Absolutely, and so what we're referring to here for people who haven't seen it is yours truly has a guest appearance in episode 10. A lot of great stars in these episodes. You'll see Ron Paul, Steve Forbes, incredible people. But the what Aiden came up with, particularly for is that tour around the world, showing more and more and more of everything. The graphics, the images. It just did a really spectacular job of driving that home. And I think once people get their arms and minds around this idea of exponential growth, you realize that, that exponential money printing, like that, literally everything that the central banks are attempting to do just doesn't comport with reality. And so that's really what came to me watching episodes 9 and 10, was that humans have this amazing ability to depart from reality.
You would think that Japan would realize by now that Keynesian economics doesn't work.
You'd think.
30 years they've been trying this, and it just does not work.
I know, and it's going to end so badly. They have a shrinking, aging population, and they're printing more and more into that, and the debt per capita is just spiking like crazy, and they have no way of bringing new people in because of their cultural. So it's just going to break at some point.
They've done experimental proof for all of us, and they just keep on repeating the experiment, and they come up with the same absolute proof. Keynesian economics doesn't work. Oh, well, it was because we didn't try enough of it.
Well, yeah. So, hey, you've alluded to this a couple times. How does this? What happens when this finally runs out of runway? What does the end of this look like? Do you think?
Well, I've tried to protect myself as best I can. And I'm actually grateful for the extra time that we have been allowed, because this should have been a major disaster in 2008. But they slapped Band-Aids on it that are a manipulation that's going to come back to haunt us. The size and scale of the manipulations that the world's central banks did with the crisis of '08 is unparalleled in history. So you've got to take the previous examples in history and then go times what? 10, 100, 1,000, a million? I don't know, but it's going to be big. I've often said that 2008 was just a speed bump on the way to the main event. There's a catastrophe coming, and because, when I was writing my book, one of the things that I discovered is that every 30 to 40 years, the world had a brand new monetary system, completely different from the last one. The classical gold standard before World War I, the intra-war gold exchange standard, and then Bretton Woods from 1944 to 1971, and now the global dollar standard. And they're completely different, the way that these things work. The previous transitions have been baby steps from full gold backing to 40% gold backing to an unspecified gold backing to no gold backing. When I was writing my book, I was researching all of these things, and you could read about the different monetary systems in isolation. Nobody had put together the fact yet that the world's monetary systems change. Nobody had written like a book or an article on all of the different monetary systems together and these changes. Well, the worst designed one out of all of them is the global dollar standard, and it was stable from 71 until Saddam Hussein started selling oil in euros, because it's also backed by the petrodollar, an agreement that Saudi Arabia made, and it was actually top secret, and it was declassified in 2016, and all the conspiracy theorists got proven correct that the U.S. had made a deal with Saudi Arabia to where Saudi Arabia would take all the excess dollars that they get paid for by all of the oil that we import, and they would buy U.S. treasuries, and that oil would only be denominated in U.S. dollars. So every country on the planet that bought oil had to hold U.S. dollars. And so it sort of kept Bretton Woods, the old system before the global dollar standard, had made it so that every foreign central bank had to hold U.S. dollars, and then the dollar was the currency that was still pegged to gold. And so all currencies were pegged to gold through the U.S. dollar. And then the petrodollar sort of backed that up. Saddam Hussein was the first little chink in the armor of the global dollar standard, and now these nails in the coffin of the global dollar standard are coming to where there's multiple ones per week. It's just at an incredible rate. People don't realize how fast this is falling apart. So now we've got something I called the everything bubble a couple of years ago. Everybody's calling it that now. I also call it the Bernanke bubble, and it's going to be followed by the Bernanke bust. You know, when the NASDAQ crashed when the stock market crashed in 2000, the NASDAQ bubble was a Greenspan bubble. He created it. And then we had the Greenspan bust after it, and he took interest rates down way too low and trying to get the stock markets back up. And he accidentally created a real estate bubble that devastated the world. And that popped, and that was another Greenspan bubble, and it was a Greenspan bust. Bernanke was the person that was left to clean up the mess, and he created all of that currency and took interest rates way too low and held them there way too long, and created what is now the Bernanke bubble, or the everything except gold and silver bubble. That's what it's the everything except gold and silver bubble. Yeah. Because gold and silver are tremendously undervalued right now, and I dare you to try to find another asset that's tremendously undervalued. There just isn't. By all measures, everything is just in these hyper bubbles, and real estate isn't quite a hyper bubble. It's not quite as big as 2005 and 6, but by all measures, it's back into a bubble. But now we've got the bond bubble, the biggest debt bubble in the world. And those things are going to be popping so we had a stock market crash in the year 2000. Then in 2008, we had stocks and real estate. This crash is going to be stocks, real estate, and bonds, including a lot of sovereign debt that's going to be, sovereign debt, for anybody that is listening, that's debt issued by a country, the national bonds. So we've got, but there's going to be corporate bonds and a whole lot of other bonds that are crashing at the same time. And so it's all of the standard financial asset classes, including safe haven classes, bonds, that are going to be crashing at the same time that the world monetary system is falling apart. And there's going to be an emergency meeting of a bunch of like the G20 finance ministers and a bunch of economists or something like that, just like there was in 1922 in Genoa, the Genoa conference to try and that's where they came up with the gold exchange standard. Just like in 1944, the Bretton Woods conference, when they came up with the Bretton Woods system, just like in 1971 when they came up with the Washington Accord, which was a new monetary system that actually never got implemented because when Bretton Woods fell apart, it just dissolved into sort of the default. Everybody had U.S. dollars, and so the U.S. dollar was just selected as the international currency, and it's been to great benefit of the United States. Every time we create a new dollar and cause inflation, it doesn't just dilute the dollars within the United States, and more than half of the dollars reside outside the United States. So when we cause inflation of the dollar, the currency supply that is outside the United States, it steals purchasing power from other countries and transfers that purchasing power to the United States. And so we've had this privilege, and we've abused this privilege, starting with George Bush Jr., with the deficit spending that he started, and then Obama magnified, and now last year they're saying that it was 800 and something billion, but the national debt went up by like 1.1 or 1.2 trillion. I don't remember the exact figures. And there's this huge area that's just a lie that they're telling us every year. We're already in trillion-dollar deficits right now. And so we've got this convergence of things happening. And one of the things that I discovered when I was when I was updating my book, Guide to Investing in Gold and Silver, I call it the financialization of government. I was looking at a chart of the tax revenues for the federal government, and I went, oh my God, this looks like a chart of the stock market. And I overlaid tax revenues with the Wilshire 5000 total market cap index, so the value of the stock market. And lo and behold, they had no correlation before the year 2000, but since the year 2000, when the stock market goes down, so do tax revenues. When the stock market goes up, so do tax revenues. And so the government now is highly dependent on the stock markets doing well. And when in the crash in 2000, the stock market crash, tax revenues fell 18%. In the global financial crisis of 2008, tax revenues fell 28%. And, it took 4.5 years from the crash of 2000 to get tax revenues back up to the break-even point where they were in the year 2000. It took 5.5 years from 2008 to get tax revenues back up to the break-even point. And so during these pullbacks in tax revenues, deficit spending explodes, and currency creation has to explode to accommodate all of the deficit spending. We're already doing these trillion-dollar deficits, and that means when the next crisis hits, that and this is going to be one hell of a crisis. So I'm expecting the stock market to fall more than it did in the crisis of 2008. Mm-hmm. And that means that tax revenues are probably going to fall by 50 or 60% or more. And what is the current tax revenues are $3.5 trillion or something like that, and we spend about $4.5 trillion. Yep. I haven't checked it this month, so I can't keep up with it because it changes so fast. But yeah. So you're talking, you got to get ready for multi-trillion-dollar deficits. That's what's coming, multi-trillion-dollar deficits. And now at the same time, we've got an administration that's, I don't really care who's in office because it doesn't seem to make that much difference. I look at the economics, what's going on economically. So I'm not, what I don't like is that Trump isn't understanding some fundamental economics. Let me see, there's an equation that I've got to look at here, and the equation is imports minus exports are identical to investment minus savings plus government spending minus taxes. And so if you want to do a bunch of deficit spending, either a bunch of people have to increase the amount of bonds that they buy in the United States, or you have to have more imports than exports and have those excess dollars or excess dollars flowing out of the United States, so that a country that does not want its exchange rate to change, like China, wants to keep their goods cheap so they can keep people employed over there, making all these goods and selling them to us. Let me see. Sorry, I'm hesitating here, and I shouldn't do this when we're on a live call, but I've got to look at a chart here, because out of the 21.3 trillion, 6.2 trillion is owned by foreigners. 7 trillion is owned by U.S. institutions and individuals. The Federal Reserve owns 2.3 trillion of the national debt, and intergovernmental agencies own 5.7 trillion, which is sort of a Ponzi scheme, shuffle stuff around thing. But,
yep.
Anyway, that 6.2 trillion, if the trade deficit goes away, then the U.S. investors have to pick up that slack, or the Federal Reserve. If the U.S. investors have to pick up that slack, that means you've got to offer much higher interest rates to attract them to buy those treasury bonds, which slows down the economy and private business, and that'll cause the crash. If it's the Federal Reserve buying it, it just means that they're monetizing the debt themselves, and you end up with, they can keep interest rates low, but you've got to create enormous quantities of, you'd have to create $6.2 trillion worth of currency to take the current foreign debt, the current U.S. debt, off of foreign holders of debt, off their hands. And that is what has to happen if Trump wants the trade of balance to go back into equilibrium. And so he wants to do deficit spending, and so he wants to have his cake and eat it too, is what I'm saying. He doesn't understand economics. There's math behind this. What he wants, he can't have. Economics will not allow it.
Well, it's of all that, what really jumps out to me here is this idea that you started with, which is that currency regimes have a lifespan, and the dollar's had a good long run, and there's signs. There's signs everywhere. Designed. Yeah, I just saw another crumble at the base of the dollar wall today in the newspaper, where India wanted to buy some S-400 anti-aircraft missile systems from Russia. The United States said, no, don't do that. We think that's a bad idea. And India said, we'll just pay for them in rubles then, right? Totally bypassing the dollar system for military hardware. And of course, Russia's busy coming up with a parallel SWIFT system to bypass the U.S. banking system.
And so is China.
And all, it's happening really fast.
If you look at the currency swap lines, Canada and all of Europe now do currency swaps with China without having to use the dollar as the intermediary. These things are coming so quickly and there's such a variety of these death of the dollar. When they revealed that the petrodollar in 2016, when the documents were declassified, that was true, with China opening up oil futures on the Shanghai exchange, that pretty soon China is just going to demand that OPEC, they're the world's largest oil importer. They're larger than the United States. They buy more oil from OPEC than we do. And so they're going to demand one day that oil be priced in yuans, and that they buy it directly on that all China oil imports go through the Shanghai exchange and are paid for in yuan instead of, but the thing is, when they deliver the oil into a contract, when an OPEC country delivers that oil, the contract can, the contract is settled, now they've got a bunch of yuan on the exchange, and they can go over to a gold contract and turn it into gold and take delivery of gold off of the exchange. So they can get paid in yuan or gold, or they can put it on the Forex and get dollars. But the thing is, the dollar is being bypassed all over the world, and we've been using the dollar. The dollar has been weaponized. That's the problem.
Yeah.
We've been using it against everybody for years, and this really, the weaponization of the dollar became big under George Bush Jr., and it has become bigger and bigger and bigger, and the world is rebelling. And so this extraordinary privilege that we have had, that we should have tried to cherish, because we were able to transfer wealth from the rest of the world from 1944 until the end of, whenever the end of the global dollar standard comes, we won't have that extra income that we're getting right now of transferring whatever the inflation rate is of the currency supply. That's the amount of wealth, the percentage of wealth that we're transferring from all these other countries to the United States every year. If half the dollars are outside the United States, that half of those dollars are seeing the same dilution of purchasing power that the ones within the United States are seeing. So
I know it's nothing new under the sun, though, right? And so
Right.
History gives us a guide here. Listen, humans are humans. We want our free lunches. We'd rather put something off to the future if we can, and not take the pain today. But what happens is the potential energy just gets built and built and built, and you add on top of that a United States that's been behaving a little bit dictatorially, and we've told other countries, here, grab this live wire, we'll shock you with it whenever we want. And they're like, tell you what. How about we come up with our own system that doesn't hurt us as badly as frequently? And they come up with parallel currency systems. So really big changes coming. And so that's why I really want to direct people back to your hidden secrets of money.
Your exponential growth example.
That's lurking there too.
We're coming to the end of this currency system, and in the exponential growth example, what you say is that everything speeds up at the end. And look at what we've already done to the base currency supply in the United States, and that's nothing compared to what's coming. Everything speeds up at the end, and when we get to the end of this currency system, you're going to see some massive currency printing going on. When the next big emergency is going to be much bigger than the last, and it took they had to add 400% to the currency, to the base currency supply, and take interest rates from 5.5% down to zero, pretty much, to get this economic recovery that we're in that is phony because of that. It was all manipulated. And so the next time, if they want to get that same amount of kick, they have to, it's not increasing by the same amount of dollars, it's a percentage thing that is going to give them a kick. So they've gone from 0.8 trillion of base currency, and right now it's like at 4 trillion, or 3.2 trillion, something like that. And they're going to have to quadruple that to get the same kick, but this crisis is going to be bigger. So that means that base currency is going to be larger. It's going to be bigger than our current M2. M2 includes all of this fractional reserve lending currency. And so,
which is why people should run, not walk, to their nearest gold and silver dealer. Really, honestly, if you haven't bought something that is either nailed down or not nailed down or whatever, if you haven't done that, I just, this is a thesis of mine, is that when the big money decides to stampede away from all this ersatz paper stuff into real stuff, whatever that is, whether that's land or yachts or diamonds or gold and silver or whatever it is, you're going to find that those doors are tiny, they're skinny, and that the people who have access to that stuff are going to be the ones who are going to be able to procure it. And guess what? The retail investors are going to have some tough times with that. But with that, hey, Mike, we're out of time for today. And
gold and silver will become known as unaffordium and unobtainium.
Unaffordium and unobtainium. Well, it happened briefly. I mean, we talked about this before, but back in 2009 and 8 and 11, when there were these big runs in prices, we saw the retail pipeline just dry up. And I think that's going to happen again. Of course, you know a lot more about that being in the biz, but we're out of time for today. Let me ask this in closing. How do we direct people to your amazing work, and how do they keep following your astonishing outputs?
You can go to hiddensecretsofmoney.com, and the videos are there. You could go to our YouTube channel. It's if you go to YouTube and you just do a search for Mike Maloney or Hidden Secrets of Money, there's if you watch this at the end of episodes 9 and 10, there's bonus features that you can watch. So watch both episodes. At the end of episode 10, click that bonus feature thing, and you'll be taken to hiddensecretsofmoney.com, where you can watch bonus features. And in there, one of the things I do is I have some stills of both episodes, and I do like commentary on the whole thing. And I think your viewers are just going to love this stuff. And it's important if they've watched the crash course, this is another example of your exponential growth section of your crash course, just beautifully animated, that brings everything home, all narrated by you, Chris. So and I'm very proud of my team. I want to thank them again. And so that's about it. Hidden Secrets of Money. And when you go to my website, goldsilver.com, you can download a free copy of my book, Guide to Investing in Gold and Silver. And only 20% of it is actually a guide to investing in gold and silver. The first 25 or 30% is very entertaining monetary history, how central banking works, and so on. It's a little short history of the Federal Reserve. And then there's some simple economics, the current state of the global economy, some potential outcomes, and then the last 20% of the book is a guide to investing in gold and silver. But it's free at goldsilver.com.
Well, thank you so much for all of that, and thank you for this work. Thank you for your time today. Really, everybody listening, you are just going to love this stuff. Please check out The Hidden Secrets of Money. If you haven't seen episode 1, start there. And if you've watched all the way up through episode 8, you've got 9 and 10 waiting for you. We've got the links at the bottom of this, of course, to make it easy for you. So with that, Mike, thank you so much for your time today and for this incredible gem of a series.
Thank you, Chris.